Welcome to part 2 on the tutorial on our Christmas pillow. If you would like to see how to do the applique tree, go ahead and check out part 1. And otherwise, let's get started on part 2, and Donna will show you how to make this nice ruffle.
The patchwork ruffle is just made with strips. It's made with 2.5-inch strips. So if you have a couple of extra strips, I'm going to use 4 left over from some other project, that's what you can use to make this ruffle. So I'm going to cut these off the bolt because I want these particular prints and I don't have any extra ones. And I'm going to stack them up and I'm going to cut all 8 layers all at once. If you're not comfortable cutting 8 layers, then you can cut 2 or 4. I'm going to use my weight to hold this down. And I'm just going to make a first cut, and then I only need 1 strip of each fabric. So I'm just going to move it over 2.5 inches and cut 1 strip. Then we're going to take all 4 strips and we're going to sew them side by side along their long edges. What we're doing is making a strip unit here. We're going to sew all 4. And then we're going to cut them, and then we're going to sew them back together. So 1/4 inch seam, don't stretch either piece. You want to use a pretty small stitch length because we're going to be cutting this and we don't want the seams to come apart. So I use a pretty small stitch length there. I finger pressed all of the seams to the right here. And now I'm going to cut this in half. This is right about where these folds are. It doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. This is just what I call a rough cut. And I am going to sew this onto here. And then I'm going to iron the whole unit. Because we did the finger pressing earlier, it irons up really flat. Now I'm going to take this over to the cutting board and I'm going to fold it not all the way in half. I'm going to fold it a little bit offset so that my seams are not right on top of themselves. So this seam allowance is not right on top of that one. And then when I go to cut it, it won't be really lumpy right where those seams are. And we're going to cut this into 2.5-inch strips. These are just 2.5-inch strips, and I don't really need the weight because it isn't very thick, so this is pretty easy for me to cut, but use the weight if you want. So I'm just going to cut all of them into 2.5-inch pieces, and then once they're all cut, we're just going to stitch them all end to end till we have a really long piece of patchwork. So I'm just sewing these end to end into a really long piece. I think there's only 7 seams here. It's starting to look really fun. So each one here, I'm just finger pressing that small seam flat. Look at how fun that is. And it went together so fast. So I'm just going to give it a quick press. And this will make it lie really flat. And then we're going to get the other parts of the ruffle that go on this. The last part of the ruffle that we need is this little bit here that goes up against the pillow, and this part here that's at the tip of the ruffle and it's folded over to the back. So this is kind of the sandwich part of the ruffle. So we're going to sandwich this pieced ruffle on here. So I just need to cut some 4 3/4 and some 1 3/4 out of this guy. So I'm going to take these 3 wider ruffle pieces and I'm going to sew them into one long piece. And I'll do the same thing with the skinny ruffle parts. So I always stitch inside the selvage here. You can cut that off ahead of time if you like. I tend to stitch right here and then trim it down to 1/4 inch. Then I know I don't have any of that icky dotted part there showing. Now we're just going to sandwich this one between these two guys. I've already got this ironed nice and flat, so we're just going to stitch this on here, and I'm gonna move this up a little bit again so that that selvage is going to get cut off, and I'm gonna leave this pieced part on the bottom. The seams are all facing down, so it's gonna stitch up really fast like that. This is stitched all the way along there. Now we just need to stitch this one on. And I'm just gonna move this one down just a little bit so that this is not even with that, so that when we come farther down the way, the seams won't all line up, and that'll make less bulk. So we're just gonna move it down about 1/2 inch. I'm gonna wanna finger press all of the seams away from the middle. That's the way they want to lie anyway, because there's all these patchwork seams and they don't want to fold. They want to stick away from the middle. So I'm just going to finger press along here just a little bit. Even if you don't finger press, it's really easy to iron this part. I've got it pressed out flat and I'm going to steam it. Now that it's all nice and flat, we are going to fold it in half to make our ruffle. So I'm just making these raw edges meet. And even though it looks like this is a lot bigger than this one here, by the time we stitch this up, it's going to get a lot smaller. So this is the whole ruffle that's going to go all the way around the pillow. But before we gather this up, we want to make it into one big tube. So we need to neaten off these ends so that we can stitch them together. Now we're going to take it over to the machine. We're going to open it back up and we're just going to stitch this together. So I'm going to stitch these together, and I'm going to be real careful that I match those seams so that everything lines up. I'm just going to finger press this seam a little bit, and then we will refold it. So we'll refold this. And now what we've got is a great big tube of a ruffle. And I'm going to machine baste it right along here so that these raw edges stay together. Now we're ready to take this ruffle and make it gathered. I like to use what's called a shearing foot. So this is a funny looking foot, and they will look different depending on your machine model, but this will make the ruffle really, really fast. So you might have to ask your machine dealer for what kind of foot you can get to make the ruffle on your particular machine. It's sometimes called a gathering foot, a ruffling foot. So I'm going to use a long stitch length, and I'm going to tighten my tension up pretty darn tight here. So I'm going to use about a 1/4 inch distance from the raw edge. I'm just going to line up the foot with the edge, and I'm going to prevent the fabric from coming out from behind here with my hand. I'm going to hold this. So with that foot, you can see we're getting it nicely gathered here. So I'm going to keep holding this because that makes it go a little bit tighter. And this is just the neatest foot ever. Even if you're only going to make one pillow, I recommend buying the foot. Now when you come to the end, just stitch over your previous stitching a little bit. And don't cut your threads off short. You want to leave a long tail of thread here. If you cut it real short, the gathers could pull out. So that's all we need for the whole pillow. And you want it to measure about 56 inches, which is about what we've got here. And we can stretch a little or ease a little in if it's not exactly the same dimension as the pillow. Now we're going to stitch this onto the pillow top. I've switched the machine back, so I have normal tension, the straight sewing foot, and a normal stitch length. And now I'm going to stitch the ruffle onto the edge of the pillow top. So I'm just going to line my edges up here. You can pin all the way around if you like, but I'm just going to line up the edges and stitch around because I know my ruffle is about the right length. So I'm going to stitch again about a 1/4 inch away right on top of my gathering stitch. And you want to kind of straighten out the ruffle as you go. You don't want to have the ruffle sticking like this. You want to have it laying flat so the edges are even. We're going to go all the way around and we're just going to pivot at the corners. So here's a corner. I stopped about a 1/4 inch from the edge. I'm just going to turn everything and then turn your ruffle and keep sewing. So you can see here I'm lining the edge of the ruffle up with the edge of that pillow top. So here's the last little bit and we're just going to stitch right over where we started. So now the ruffle is all the way around the pillow. So this is what it's going to look like. But we're going to put the back on first. So we are going to leave all this ruffle facing in like this. And I like to pin the corners first. So I don't want this ruffle coming over where I'm going to stitch. So what I do is straighten out this corner here, and I'm just holding this with this hand here, and I'm twisting and pulling away the ruffle here, and then I'm just going to put a pin right here, and that's going to keep all of this part exactly where we want it. So here, let me show you the method again. You hold this part flat and pull the ruffle away from that seam, and as you come towards the corner, you just kind of twist it. What we want is we want to be able to have this stitching here nice and straight with no ruffle parts going over the edge. So I'm not even pinning through all the layers. I'm just making that stay in the way. If you want, you can put a pin in here and here, but this ruffle tends to stay in place. It's just in the corners that we have trouble. You want to kind of hand press your ruffle down so this is as flat as it can be. So you can see now, you can see the stitching where we sewed the ruffle on all the way around. And that's important. We won't be able to see it when we start stitching the back on, but we know that what we don't want is we don't want it sticking like that where we might stitch over that ruffle. That's why it's good to have it nice and flat. Now this is the back. It's about an 18-inch piece of fabric and I've just split it along the fold. So I'm going to take 1/2 here. And I'm just going to eye this up. I'm turning back about 4 inches, 3-4 inches there. And I'm going to put this over on the pillow. And it's about 4 inches from the top of the pillow. You can kind of use your ruffle there as a guide. Now I'm going to take the other half, where the selvage is here, and I'm going to overlap this. And I'm going to move it down about 3 inches. Now I'm going to pin everything. So I can feel where my stitching is, where my ruffle is. And I'm just going to pin right there. And I'm going to smooth it out and I'm going to pin over here. And we want to be sure to pin where this part is, where the overlap is. So I'm going to pin this up here. Same thing on the other side. And you can feel where that stitching is with your hand on the back side there. And then smooth it this way, put a pin up here, and a pin at the bottom. And that's all the pinning I'm going to do. You can pin more if you like. Now we're going to stitch from this side. So we have a guide. We can tell where to stitch, but we just want everything pinned nice and flat. So I'm going to start stitching on this side. I'll start up here and then I'll take that pin out. Now just stitch right on top of your other stitching or a little bit to the inside of it. Now if I flip this up, you can see where I'm going to stitch, and I'm just going to give this a slight pull here, make sure it's flat, and I'm going to go all the way around the pillow. You want to trim off your excess backing and batting about even with your raw edges. It doesn't have to be really, really close. Now we are going to start to flip it. We do have pins in the corners, so we want to pull out any of those pins. Then reach in the other side. Oh, it turned out really nice. Now we're going to check for threads. You also want to make sure that you didn't catch your ruffle anywhere. Even I, once in a while, will catch a little bit, but that's okay. You can flip it back inside out and take out that stitching and re-stitch. Last step is just to put the pillow form inside. So these pillow forms, you can get them at Joann's, you can get them at Walmart. They're just made for putting into a decorative cover. So this is the 14-inch size here. You have to just push a little bit of it out in the corners there. And then give it a little plumping there. All done. I'm really happy with how the pillow came out. I love the patchwork ruffle there. You get so much color in. Great way to use up your scrap strips. Now, if you have other Christmas colors you like to work with, we use a lot of traditional colors. We've also got some really nice silver, red, black down here. That would be beautiful. The blue Christmas, I love the silver accents on the blue. If you're making Christmas quilts, this is just a great accent to put on there. Nice to put on your couch. Really, really dress your house up for Christmas. Thanks for watching our tutorial today on the Christmas tree pillow. Remember, this is a free download and you can get the pattern on our website. If you'd like to get notifications on the latest items that we're working on, the best way is to sign up for our email list, and I'll put a link in the description down below. Happy quilting!